Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Fire Emblem, Crimson Flower in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 1, Their Early Beginning. In the hallowed, murky depths of the mountains residing in Fodlan, a rich stream of wind howled across the mist. As of now, many of the bandits that had previously raided the villages nearby had found refuge in these large bumps of the landscape. To them, it was the perfect escape. With nobody to hunt for them, they could take time to distribute their earnings, before traveling to pillage their next place of interest. The screams of kidnapped children and women could be heard far across the mountain. To them, it seemed to be in vain, as with an abandoned landscape such as this, lay lost. As for what these prisoners could be used for, there were a variety of uses. Oftentimes, they would be abused, sold as slaves, or kept as a means to increase the workforce of the bandits. Eventually, to silence their screams, they were slowly picked off with spears one by one up until the screaming had ended. Body disposal was always a pain, though, so many of the bandits had preferred to avoid this method. With several tents scattered across the urban landscape, the tallest one was reserved for the chief of their sinister group. He was a well-built man. Carelessness had caused his hair to go bald, and he had a distinct scar across his forehead. With his brawny hands and armed weaponry, he commanded his makeshift army of bandits with great verbal strength. On this particular night, the group had earned a larger sum of money than they usually had gotten. After ransacking for beer in the neighboring tavern, all of them sat, grouped together in a drunken state. These men who had sacrificed all humanity had found refuge from their responsibilities via taking a life of betrayal. With each tap of their cups of beer, they had lowered the chances of detecting an enemy. They did not care. For all they knew, there would simply be hikers of mild threat around them. They all kept away from them, anyway. There was no need for concern when they were such a large group. Some time passed. In a daze, they began to take the path of a deep slumber. Before closing their eyes, though, footsteps were heard. Finally, a singular entity emerged. Once he made his cameo, every bandit had stopped their celebrations to focus on him. Some woke up, whilst some had drawn their weapons. The large campfire they were using was quickly lit by a wooden stick, which was then thrown at him in the hopes of getting the man to run away. He had deflected it with a shield. Before any of the bandits could make an attack on the man, the stick of fire was thrown back in their direction, and into the tents. A large flame burst forth, scaring some of those nearby. Now, everyone had their full attention on the upcoming visitor. He was finally seen in full view. In recognition of the various scars layered across his body, almost every single bandit had grown fearful now. In an instant, almost all of them had started a mad dash to escape the fight that was to start. Screams were heard, weapons were thrown, people were hurt. Panic had ensued at such a quick rate, that nobody had time to notice the two young children emerging beside the man. The two siblings looked towards the chaos. It was normal to them. On a weekly basis, they would often see various reactions to the sight of their father. Sighing, the sister spoke. "They never seem to be scared of us," she pouted, taking out her sword. "Why is it that you always scare them off before you even do anything, father?" Patting her head, the older man spoke finally. "I guess I've already left my mark here in Fodlan. Nothing I can do about it, but it is a pain, sometimes." Whatever the case, the brother had finally decided to speak now. "I assume it is the same as usual. Shall we start?" He was always ready to dive straight into his work. The father smirked, finding his manner of expression funny. "You know the drill. You two scamper about and pick off the deserters. I'll go see their head honcho." The twins nodded in agreement to their father's words. After each of them drew their swords, a mad dash was made to the direction of the panic currently ensuing. Once the connection of swords was made by the brother, the enemy had known there was little that could be done for escape. Whilst originally, the mountains had represented a rich white color, in an instant, it had become a red canvas. With such skill, it was no longer the helpless prisoners inciting the screaming, as the group of three skillfully picked off those who had most deserved their punishment. With their quickening chain of attacks, they defeated their sides of bandits in quick blows. The bandits did anything they had in their power to fend them off. Any sticks of fire thrown at them were either cut down or repelled via shield. If a sword attempted to cut them from behind, they would slide across to another direction and interfere with their plans. Even underhanded tricks did not work on the two youngest fighters. One of the bandits had attempted to pull down the sister's hair. Initially giving off a quick scream, she reacted instinctively and cut it off immediately with her sword. After pulling the bandit onto the ground, the brother quickly checked on her to make sure she was in stable condition. "Father warned you about growing your hair long." The girl took a moment to stare at him, realizing any comment of annoyance would not seep through him. After accepting this, she replied, "I like long hair. It isn't any of your business how I choose to look. Say that all you want, but it would be detrimental to our progress if you were to get injured." The sister ignored his comment, continuing her own progression through the enemy ranks. After a long line of red was made on the ground, the tent housing the prisoners was opened up by the brother. He tried his best to follow the advice of his father, but it was of little use. Any forced smile of assurance he gave frightened those too helpless to respond. He did little to show annoyance, instead simply piling on his inventory of medication and food supplies on the ground before swiftly returning back to the action around him. "Please stay here until we can dispel the bandits. I assure you we will not take too long." They simply nodded in a slight whimper, whilst some had crawled across the ground, picking up what was given to them in shivering gratitude. By now, the battle was at a point where the screaming was becoming lower in sound. It was at this moment that the trio had relaxed in their movements and begun using slower attacks. Of course, even still, they were impregnable. Meanwhile, the father had walked towards the head of the bandits. He offered no smile of emotion to the vile villain in front of him. Rather, his face was one of full composure and readiness. "I think it would have been wiser for you to have run away like the lackeys around you." He swung his sword in a swift motion of intimidation. "Even still, I commend your efforts. Unfortunately, you're not getting any forgiveness from me after all you've done." The bandit simply smirked ignorantly at his warning. "They say legends die out over time. I think that applies to the famous Blade Breaker as well. Why don't we test that? If anything, I'm more than ready to dash." A strike was given. The bandit had embraced his evil nature and used an underhanded trick to surprise his opponent. His sword quickly swung with all of his strength. As the wind blew furiously past him, he was too engrossed in his fake aura of victory to notice the slight smile of the blade breaker. His sword was shattered in 2 pieces. Somehow, the man had pulled out his own weapon and made such a swift swing to the bandit, that his attempts were rendered useless in just a few seconds. The enemy widened his eyes in fear. It was only at this moment that he showed the slightest signs of remorse towards all of his actions. He could not repent for long, however, for his last sight was the one of a sword slashing cutting across his face. The bandits had now been fully subdued. After freeing the prisoners from their holding, they were instructed on the direction back to their homes and given travel supplies to ensure they made it back. Once they were gone, the 3 had taken careful time to clear up the mess they had made. "I don't enjoy doing this every time we get into a battle," the young girl said, reluctantly moving the corpses of the bandits to an abandoned area. "They are part of Father's orders. You need to obey them," the brother said, unshaken by his task. The sister groaned once more, but was ignored by her twin. Accepting her family's orders as the ultimate ruling, she continued regardless. The father of the 2 smiled as his little workers continued the work before them. He was incredibly proud to have them by his side. It was only a few years ago that he had become their sole parent, and he wanted to ensure it stayed that way. He continued digging a large hole whilst the 2 children carried the deceased bandits, respectfully laying them into the hole created by him. The sister, who had managed to hold off on her general disgust, was finally given a window of opportunity to enjoy herself for who she truly was. Unlike her other peers, she was forced to shoulder the pain she carried with her. She did not mind this, as her father had always praised her for providing an emotional viewpoint if they were to ever get into a debate of moral ambiguity. However, there were not always times that reality would agree with the young girl. She finally saw it. Before she was yet to pick up another bandit, she saw something tightly clutched in his hand. Out of childlike curiosity, she moved it away, picking the object tightly clenched by the corpse. It did not take long for the after effects to ensue. She felt heavy, suddenly suffering the consequences of the battle they had just fought. The object was a photo of a younger man, seen smiling with his family, long before he had taken a life of treachery. She had killed not just a bandit, but a human, and one that was much like her. She gave out loud, unable to control the sweat that poured out of her. Tears began sprinkling her cheeks, and her face started turning red. Her vision blurred, and she began to lose her balance. It was at this point that her thoughts began to spiral out of control. She no longer saw the bandit as a foul being with selfish intent, rather, she began to project those happy memories she had experienced in her life onto the image held so tightly by the lifeless enemy. The brother, who was now ready to continue their earlier debate from before, walked to her. He saw her shaking, realizing she was doing it yet again. Looking around, he did as he was always told to do, quickly alerting his father to look over his twin. His sister did not take notice, which was a bad sign. It was at this stage that not even shaking her out of the misery she felt would not work. Once she felt her tears begin to reach the ends of her face, she screamed. Finally, the blade breaker took notice. He looked back, seeing the brother about to finish his approach to him. "She's doing it again," he said, unaware of the severity of the situation. "Tell me sooner, damn it." The father ignored his son, quickly making his way to the crying mess ahead of him. He dropped everything that was on his mind, rushing to the daughter that needed urgent attention. Once he arrived, he carefully began to stroke the back of the young girl in a circular motion. The brother watched, curiously, unable to understand what was going on. Still, she finally moved. Still sobbing, she spoke, "I'm so sorry." Her father could not think of what to say to her. "Come on, kiddo. Let's get you somewhere safe." He held her hand, guiding her to mount on his horse. "We can do the rest and you stay here. You were brave today." The girl continued shaking, whispering incoherent apologies to herself. Realizing that this was the furthest he could achieve in letting her return to a calmer state, the father returned to his job, leaving the young girl to calm herself down. Even if they were tired out and needing rest, the trio continued their journey at the darkest of hours, hoping to find shelter through an inn soon. They had never liked using the tents of their enemies. There was always the chance that the belongings housed in them were of illegal origin, so it was never in their best interest to encourage this. Since it was surely past midnight, the children had begun feeling fatigue wear them down. Unfortunately, with only one horse present, only one of the two siblings could sleep during their travels. Today, this seat was given to the sister. As she slept soundly, her brother looked at her, still wildly curious. It was always like this. Whenever she let her emotions free, she would stay in this trance up until she either went to sleep or managed to somehow find something else to distract her that was of greater importance. "Father." He tugged on his brown coat. "What's got you, kiddo? Is she always going to be like this? Why does she do it? It only hinders us. I do not understand how she feels it is right to be intoxicated in the defeat of her enemies during battle." The father sighed, thinking to himself before responding. "You'll understand when you're older, kid." They both gazed at her as they continued their travels. In time, it's up to her to outgrow her habits and learn from them. For now, we won't ever be able to understand what your sister is going through. Trust me, I've tried. They continued walking on in silence after that answer was given. For now, this would be their current life. In the years to come, they could never have imagined the environment that they would lead next. A life of hardships, joy, sorrow, and much more. Chapter 2, The Girl on the Throne. Just as always, the young girl on the gray marble throne had awoken from her long slumber. After making her childlike yawn and patting her yawning mouth, she stared curiously at him. The area was completely made of marble-like material. The room contained steps that led to a large oversized chair, which almost always housed the young girl sleeping atop it. She was small. Alongside her size, were an assortment of various complicated materials hanging from her to make up her full set of clothing. Each fabric she wore had been stitched with great dedication. With her scattered green hair, long ears, and perplexed, yet distinct green eyes, she would always awaken from this very spot in every dream the man would have. "My, you're a curious individual." Immediately, As always, she leaned forward to inspect him. "And who might you be, exactly?" He always replied the same things. After speaking of his name, she would always ask what he was. Naturally, Byleth had the mindset of answering truthfully, "I am immortal," he would respond. "Is that so?" Now she stopped leaning forwards. "Well, you did strike me as the species that couldn't completely hold their own." Byleth always chose to ignore this comment. For years, his father had taught both him and his sister about proper etiquette, as well as the childish behavior of the young. This nonchalance and pride did not surprise him. If anything, what eluded him the most about this dream was always the constant repetition of the events taking place. As always, eventually the young girl would finally ask him of his date of birth. This was the final question in her long line of queries, and once it was asked, it seemed that the limited time he would spend with this girl would always end. Byleth knew what was to come, and he always chose to abide and follow the usual pattern that this recurring dream would follow. "I was born on the 19th of the Garland moon." It was at this point that he would see his vision slowly begin to waver. Try as might, he could never prevent this from happening. "How odd," the girl would say, not noticing the scenery around her blurring. "It seems that both of our births intertwine with one another. I'm curious. Do you see that as mere coincidence, or is it just I who is fabricating this to be more than it is?" He could never reply to that question. He was always powerless to do so. The girl now began yawning at this point. "I feel as though we may be crossing paths again in the future, however, I'm starting to suddenly feel very sleepy." Her eyelids now began to shut. It was at this point that the girl would doze off again. Nothing would happen directly after, because every time that the girl dozed off, Byleth would begin to see the slow visions of darkness suddenly overtake his sight, until he eventually woke up. For years, this was the dream he had always shared with his sister. For now, he was to awaken back into reality, where he would once again lament over the implications of this constant encounter. He awoke. Once his sister had seen him up from his bed, she closed the book she was reading and looked over to her brother, curiously. "Brother," she called out to him. "I take it you've been having the same dream again, huh?" Just like him, it seemed that his sister had shared this very same imagery during her sleep. However, there were exceptions. No matter who they were, where they traveled, or what they thought of that night, the two would rotate days whenever they dreamt of the young girl on the throne. Whilst on one day, Byleth would dream of her, on the very next day, his sister had the misfortune of seeing a corrupt version of Byleth's prior visit to the throne. For now, no explanation could be provided as to the differences in their dreams. As it stood, Byleth would often be the one who experienced the, as the sister called it, pure version of the young girl. Whenever his sister, Byleth, had the dream, many forms of phenomena would take place. Sometimes, the girl would doze off more regularly, or she would speak in a different language entirely. Perhaps the most troublesome of these corrupt happenings would be when the girl would not appear at all, leaving Byleth to stare blankly at the tall throne in front of her. It was because of this that Byleth had never once made it to the end of the dream sequences properly. All of the information she had gotten on the supposed pure version were from accounts of her brother. "I saw the girl again." "Lucky you." Byleth felt a sense of jealousy erupt from her. "Guess that means tomorrow little Miss Nothing will be coming to greet me again. It's either that, or she will be speaking a different dialect, such as the last time." "Little Miss Foreigner, then?" Byleth questioned, still enjoying the brunt of her joke. "That name is a bit much, do you not think?" Byleth now got up from the comfort of his bed. "Whatever the case, it has been years now, and we have yet to decipher a reasoning as to the dreams regarding that girl. Or why there's a stupidly unfair difference between them." "Unfair?" At this point, Byleth looked at the glum face of her sister, only to realize that after all the years that passed, she was still childish in nature. "It seems you never change." "I'd say the same for you. You've never changed, in fact." Despite being twins, the two were always opposites. They had their own habits, quirks, and mannerisms, and they always chose to stick to them. Everything besides their appearances had made them completely different people, and those who met them had remembered the two for it. Byleth was often the more serious of the two. He was always praised by his father for being a more analytical leader, often ending up commanding his sister in battle whenever the situation arose. It was because of his bluntness that he was excellent in battle, as well as in providing a logical conclusion to issues that were to arise. He was often recognized by his rough blue hair, armored sleeves, and his patterned shirt with a curious stitching on it. Belette was more of the opposing entity to her brother. She had a kind heart, often being in a position of giving immense empathy for the people she interacted with. She was never one for thinking on the battlefield, leading to her depending on her brother to lead through his masterful tactical work. Belette had slightly shorter hair than her brother, which she decided to never grow due to a hindrance it caused back when she was younger. She wore a rough gray t-shirt with an iron armored plating covering her upper body. Just below her collar was a red ribbon she used to make her easy to tell from her brother, as well as having a sleeveless shirt, with even more armored hinges equipped on her elbows. Additionally, she also sported black shorts, along with floral tights, to which she had to suffer a long debate with her father to even attempt to wear. On this night, the two were staying in a remote village known as Remire. For many years now, their family were humbled by the services of the residents and had owed a great debt to them as a result. Despite always denying their hospitality, the villagers would always insist upon it. Such was their nature, as they wanted the group to feel as though it were a new home for them. Today, once they had checked out of the inn, they were to depart to their next location of adventuring and mercenary workings. "Are you two ready to head out?" Their father had appeared. "We've been stalling for as long as we can afford, you know." "We get the drill, father." Belette began quickly packing her book away, chuckling to herself. "We're only going to increase our debt to this place, so we may as well leave quickly." "Actually, father," now Byleth spoke up from the chatter. "Sister and I were doing the calculations last night. I believe we can pay back our debt if we cut our spendings on the beer you seem eager to purchase." At this, Gerald quickly placed a face of worry. "Let's not be too hasty now, shall we?" He realized his cool attitude was losing its edge when he heard a childish snicker from Belette, prompting him to smile in defeat. Regardless of the situations they were in, however, both the siblings were always loyal to Gerald. In giving him a quick nod of obedience, they began to quickly organize their things into bags, so that they could depart for the next village in sight. Elsewhere in the village, was the scurrying of three teenagers running from their impending doom. With each step they took, the desperate aroma of their situation only grew with every meter they passed. "Trust you to make a mad dash to nowhere, Claude." "Hey, it's called a strategic retreat, and I intended for you two to stay back and hold the fort." The boy shot a quick smirk to the other two as they ran. "Obviously, I may have wanted to give a few more hints for you two to catch the memo." On hearing his excuse, a sigh was given off by the girl. "Whatever the case may be, the fact still stands that our lives are in danger. As if we needed little Miss Princess to spell it out for us." Claude snorted at her remark. Of the three students, Claude was the most mischievous. He was known for his large attitude, but chilled demeanor and friendly face. With a cocky smile and his expressive workings, he was often considered a unique individual when compared to the other house leaders in their school. He wore the usual uniform attire that was advised by his superiors, only with a yellow robe on the back, to highlight his role of importance. The other of the trio was Dimitri. Similarly to Claude, he also wore the signature uniform of his academy, only with a blue robe. He was mostly recognizable via his hanging blonde hair. As well as this, he was often seen to have a formal attitude, alongside a strangely vicious aura that was always secretly emanating off of him. Finally, was the girl known as Edelgard. Her uniform housed a red cape this time, as well as her long white hair hanging off of her head. She was always blunt in her speech, and preferred to be straightforward and efficient in her actions. Unlike most of her peers, she had big plans for the future, and she was desperate to do anything in her power to make it so. By some strange occurrence, these three individuals had somehow triggered bandits to chase after them. None of them could quite piece together the full story, as Claude's daring escape had given them little time to think. As of now, they were running frantically across Remire village, hoping to find some place of safety or help. "So, this is just a guess," Claude was grasping for breath at this point, but those individuals over there wielded swords in their back. I believe common sense dictates they're capable of saving us. As he said this, he pointed forwards to the sighting of new faces. Seeking help at such an early point of our escape. I see your brain cannot yet think enough for today, Edelgard said, mockingly. Heads up, you two. At this point, Dmitri began running at a faster pace. It seems they have archers attempting to shoot at us. Great, Edelgard groaned to herself. The trio realized that their run would be futile lest they get help. Noticing the appearance of the capable individuals in front of them that Claude mentioned earlier, the three quickly became in sync and made a dash towards them. Across from them, Gerald had finally managed to get his children to pack their belongings. It was soon time to set out, even if it was quite late at night to be doing so. Gerald was a strongly built individual. Often revered as the fabled blade breaker, he had scars drawn out on various locations of his face. He also wore a contrasting brown jacket to his children, alongside a large shield equipped on his back. Despite how appearances would make him seem hostile, he was actually a somewhat kind soul on the inside. Around the time that the twins had exited the building was the time that Claude fell face flat in fatigue. Ouch. Rough landing, he said, getting up slowly in pain. Say, would you three strong-looking individuals care to kill for us? Only confusion could be exchanged between the three who had just witnessed Claude's antics. They did not have too much time to think, however, as soon Edelgard and Dmitri had quickly slid across to a halt. My apologies for the introduction being hosted by him of all people, Edelgard bowed her head slightly in a hurry, but we would appreciate it if you could dispel some bandits that have been chasing us. Finally, Dmitri spoke, she is correct. I cannot tell you for how long we have been running. Noticing that these three teenagers were the innocents in this mess, Gerald slowly began to raise his hand in a command for his children to adhere to. However, arrows had hurled themselves across the area, ready to tear the flesh through the unguarded Dmitri. Instead of issuing his planned command, Gerald pulled out his shield at quickening speed and protected the young boy. Judging by those uniforms, I assume you three have your preferred weapons already settled for you. Edelgard, Dmitri, and Claude nodded in tandem to his questioning. Good, I suggest you pull them out to make things easier for us. We'll help you out in clearing this mess up. With smiles of relief on their faces, the three began to pull out their preferred instruments of battle. Edelgard pulled out her signature axe, whilst Dmitri brought a lance, finally ending with Claude caressing the strings of his bow. After this was done, Byleth checked on the shield of Geralt and picked off the arrow that was still pierced onto it. May I take command of this battle, father? Knock yourself out, kid. Geralt simply walked back to fetch his horse. Byleth, you go, too. I was already planning on it. After grabbing her sword, she looked at the three who requested their help. Pleasure to meet you, she shot a gleeful smile at them. Hate to say this, but let's do the introductions later. You know, when we're not in danger of dying a gruesome and painful death. Claude quickly took out an arrow to attach to the strings of his bow. Right, my bad. Byleth simply took to his advice and looked towards her brother. Are we ready, brother? I believe so, he said, quickly turning to the group. This village is not the largest, so I believe that the enemy will not have much room to hide. I want the boy with the bow to slowly advance behind us and cover our flanks. The rest of you, please spread out so we can take an outward formation. In quickly taking his advice, Byleth, Edelgard, Dmitri, and Claude got into their suggested positions. It was at this point that they all ran into battle, readying themselves for the foes of bandits ahead. Chapter 3, Eagle, Lion and Deer. Even if the three teenagers they were tasked with saving were having trouble in dispelling the bandits, both twins had already obtained years of experience in doing so, allowing them to ensure their safety during this battle. When commanding the small makeshift army, Byleth had made sure to take time in realizing each of his new allies' weaknesses. Whenever one of them stumbled in an attack, he would quickly command his sister to save them. The same could also be said when Byleth had found an opening made by the enemy, where Byleth would then order her to move on whilst one of the three new faces vanquished her foe. In doing so, he was making sure that their new allies would learn and gain experiences that would shape them for future use. With each bandit that was taken out, their victory would seem more apparent. Byleth had ordered everyone to drive off the bandits outside to a remote area of Remire so as not to impede the locals. Once this was settled, a quick movement was made towards the leader of the enemy ranks. He was a man of unappealing looks. He had a bulky body, stiff eyes, wide forehead, as well as lost teeth, which further added to show his carelessness. Once he saw the twins appear, he smirked. "To think they sent kids to defeat me," he laughed. "I'll show you what a true rogue is made of." After saying this, he made a swing, but Byleth quickly countered it with a swift strike. Once their swords had clashed, they struggled against each other for what seemed to be a handful of seconds. Quickly nodding to his sister, Byleth signaled for Byleth to thrust the enemy with his sword, causing him to fall off. By this action of cooperation, the three who had requested their help could only stare in complete awe. If they wanted to lead the countries that they resided in, then they would only need to look to follow the example of the mercenaries that had saved their lives on this day. Whilst she was impatient in checking the dead bodies, Edelgard made her way to Byleth in awe. "It was a remarkable honor to fight with you," she offered a slight smile at him, but it was soon halted once a raging cry came by her side. Due to their carelessness in checking to see if he was taken out, the leader of the bandits had risen in fury, running towards the unsuspecting Edelgard. She could only look, for once she pulled out her dagger, it would be too late. "I won't let a bunch of kids outdo all of my years of work," he screamed in his mad dash of vengeance. Byleth quickly jumped forward and swung his sword towards the direction of the axe, making their weapons clash for a prolonged amount of time. As both enemies were beginning to drain away at their strength, he quickly gave a signal to his sister, causing her to jab her sword below and separate the weapons. At the surprise, the bandit had trouble maintaining his grip on the axe, instead flinging it elsewhere in the process. He could only stare in horror. He saw Byleth's eyes that carried little emotion. On noticing this, he quickly ran in fear. Dimitri was to make an attempt to stop him, but Claude had halted his progress. "Easy there, Blondie. I think that's enough work for today. Are you not pooped yet?" He reluctantly abided by Claude's wishes, and the group quickly ran towards Edelgard to check for her safety. Whilst she was mildly startled by all of this, it was clear that this was only increasing her adoration for the two twins. Noticing this, Byleth offered a slight smile, but quickly joined her brother. "Wait, what is it exactly that you two are doing now?" Their actions had prompted Dimitri to wonder. "It's only proper etiquette to allow the dead to weep in peace. We're just going to take some time to give them a proper burial. You three should report back to our father and tell him we took care of your issue. We can talk afterwards," she continued, smiling kindly. Claude and Dimitri nodded in obedience, running out to the direction of where they had found Geralt originally. Before leaving though, Edelgard looked towards the siblings as they were doing their duty. "I cannot thank you both enough for saving me," she said, offering a slight bow. "I hope to see you lend your services to the Adrestian Empire. I would be quite pleased to see you do so." She then ran off after saying this, prompting a chuckle to appear from Byleth's face. As the two were tidying up their messes, Byleth had been meaning to check up on his sibling for some time. Years ago, his father had asked him to always ensure she was in the right mentality after every battle. Whilst this order had been issued by Geralt a long time ago, Byleth had not forgotten. He did not fully understand why, but regardless, he followed as he was told all those years ago. This entire time, he had made sure not to give Byleth any tedious commands, so as not to trigger her supposed trance again. She seemed fine as usual, which was good for him, as he had been meaning to tell her of something strange that happened earlier during the battle. "I saw the girl on the throne again. It happened just as the girl we saved was to be killed." At this, Byleth stopped carrying one of the dead bandits and looked at her brother. "Wait, are you sure?" "I'm absolutely positive about it." Before he could speak, they heard the sounds of footsteps passing them. "I can explain at a later time. For now, we should rendezvous with those three. I have a feeling that the people we hear passing by may have a chance of being associated with them." Whilst she was impatient to know of all of the details, Byleth agreed to his suggestion, and the two quickened their pace at their job. Once this was done, they quickly walked back to where they had left their father originally. Immediately when they caught sight of the twins, Smiles erupted from their faces. "We truly appreciate you saving us in that battle against those bandits," Edelgard spoke up in happiness. "My name is Edelgard von Hresvelg, and I'm heir apparent to the Adrestian Empire. I can also relate with Edelgard over my feelings of relief, thanks to you," Dmitri now spoke up. "My name is Dmitri Alexander Blaeded, and I'm the Prince of the Kingdom of Fair Gustash." "Whoa now, we're doing introductions already?" Claude quickly interrupted his rival's speech. "I'm Claude von Reagan, only the legitimate heir to the Leicester Alliance," as he continued, he lowered his tone of speech, jokingly, "also commonly known as the grandson of the elite Reagan, but let's not sweat ourselves over those details." The siblings had made sure to take note as to who these people were. Once they had memorized their names and jugged it into their heads, they looked towards their father. Much to their surprise, Gerald had a smile of pride. "These three, as you can guess, are pretty special cases." He patted both the heads of his children, to which he only gained a happy reaction from Billet. "As you can decipher from their uniforms, they attend the Officers' Academy at Garegmok Monastery. The people who go there are usually, let's just say, they're high and mighty." "I offer you to beg for your pardon," Dmitri quickly shot an irritated look at this comment. "However, I am sure that there are some commoners who have also been attending the Officers' Academy as well." "Well, I've seen my fair share of the place, I used to work there, after all." To this, both of his children looked at him with an expression of curiosity and surprise. "Oh, did I not tell you to?" "We heard nothing of the sort," Byleth answered. Before anyone had a chance to expand upon the new topic that Gerald had opened up, a new visitor had arrived to greet them. He was large in size, only wearing bulky white armor to show his status. With his constant grin and wavy hair, his looks alone had brought the attention of the group to focus on him. "Why, it can't be. Captain Gerald, former commander of the Knights of Syros, it really cannot possibly be. I've not seen you in so long, my friend." To this, a groan was heard from Gerald. "I can recognize that voice from anywhere. How are you, Alois?" The man finally appeared with his gleaming smile. When they saw his appearance, the twins began thinking of the day they were having. Somehow, the twins were meeting many new colorful characters that they were sure would leave an impact on them. Of course, from the looks of things, Gerald had not looked forward to the sighting of this new ally before them. "So, your father really is who I thought he was." Edelgard had a peculiar face upon her. "Is your father the famous blade breaker?" Both twins nodded in agreement to her query. "It's strange. He doesn't look as I had originally imagined him, and yet he still resembles the attributes of his name. I can't quite explain it." By this point, Alois had already dragged Gerald far across to talk to him in private. Both the twins looked at each other now, confused as to where these events would take them. Whilst they had not always known everything about their father, this day marked an opening onto his previous life before their time with him. "It would seem that they will be talking for a while," Dmitri looked over with little interest. "That's pretty strange for his standards. Father's usually not much for conversation." "You think that's strange? Then why is it that you both didn't know about your dad being a former commander of the Knights?" Claude quickly faced Billet out of curiosity. "Forgive me, but who exactly are these Knights of Syros?" Billet put her hands near her chin in confusion. At this, the three students suddenly looked at the twins in perplexity. To them, knowing of the Knights of Syros was seen to be a piece of valid information to transition through life. It was an absolute oddity as to why these two had not yet heard of them. Because of this, they had begun finding the situation rather amusing. "You're kidding, right?" Claude questioned, but instantly directed his attention elsewhere once Edelgard had burst into laughter. "Whoa there, what got you in the cheery mood, princess?" Both Dmitri and Claude had by far the most shocked expressions on their faces. As Edelgard was giggling to herself, both the siblings had started noticing the sort of mocking chemistry between the three students. Claude seemed like the kind of person who was laid back in his nature. However, it was as if they could sense major hints of awareness within him. In spite of his crazy antics, both of the twins knew that Claude must have had many areas in his life where he would shine amongst his peers the most. Dmitri was the most formal of the three. To them, They had many years of experience to tell that an aroma of cold-blooded vengeance was locked inside of him. He was but a tightly guarded safe of emotions, to which they would need to work hard to unlock if they were to find his true intentions. Edelgard seemed the most different from the three students. She was formal like Dmitri, but they could both sense a feeling of lost innocence that was seeping out of her. To them, it almost seemed as if she grew up into maturity at a quicker rate than she wanted. To find out more about this, it would need the same level of effort as Dmitri, maybe even more, to unlock her closely guarded secrets. Admittedly, you are not always one to laugh. What's gotten you so out of form, Edelgard? Dmitri seemed perplexed by her nature. Once she had finally stopped chuckling to herself, Edelgard spoke with a rare smile on her face. It's just been so long since I've seen something, or someone, as odd as the two mercenaries who saved us today. To not know of the Knights of Syros truly manages to reach into an unseemly amount of bizarre I can't quite comprehend just yet. When seeing her bright cheerful smile, as well as her two other peers agreeing with her about it, Belette could not help but laugh as well. She looked onto her brother, who still maintained his usual calm face. She knew that even if her brother did not show it, he was at ease along with her. Once the jolly nature had ceased, Edelgard turned back to the curious Belette. To explain, the Knights of Syros are one of the most powerful factions of knights in Fodlan. They are allies with the Central Church, and are commanded by the Church's Archbishop, Rhea. As of right now, they are on neutral grounds with all of the countries of Fodlan, but take action only when necessary. Church. Now Dmitri was set up in a position of gradual laughter. Please do not tell me you have not known about the Church. The siblings' expressions told them otherwise. Before the three students could speak up once more, Geralt and Eloise came back to the group to speak with them. At the sight of their father's return, both twins straightened their posture and awaited his command. So, it looks like we're going to give the Church of Syros a visit. His forced smile began twitching as he said this. It also looks like you three troublemakers managed to bring two old and humbled friends back to each other, Eloise said, laughing. I never knew fate could be so generous. Geralt simply sighed and mounted his horse. You can lead the way, Eloise. We'll follow from behind. Why, of course. With age, your memory might be a freckle of what it once was. It's best that I take command and show you the route you've most likely forgotten. It was at this point that everyone aside from Eloise had noticed Geralt cracking his knuckles, mixed in with a combination of his tense smile. Fear not. Allow your best friend, Eloise, to guide you. With these strings of words said by the knight, the group followed after him. Whilst they were walking, Belette gained enough confidence to go up to Edelgard. I'm sure your throat is hoarse after laughing so hard. Would you like some water from our storage? I think I have enough energy to take me to the monastery. Your offer is deeply appreciated, though. She smiled slightly at her offer. After this, Byleth jumped into the short conversation. Not having the correct amount of liquids in your body can be fatal. Even after that battle, I think it would be best for you and your classmates to drink up. Do not worry. We are almost there anyway. It was through this short exchange of words that the students watching had begun to notice the stark contrast between the mercenary siblings. Whilst one was cheerful and full of emotion, the other had an unseemly amount of bluntness with his words. This caused Edelgard to wonder as to how these two siblings were so different. If they had been together for all of their lives, how was it that their natures were so differing? Regardless, the students realized they would not get their answers, no matter how much they tried. Instead, they continued walking to their destination, onto Garagmok Monastery. Chapter 4, The Church of Syros. Whilst they all initially left at nightfall, it had progressed to daybreak once the group had finally sighted the monastery. The journey was a unique one for the siblings. They were forced to endure a plethora of vintage jokes from Eloise, alongside watching their father display the most forced smiles that they had ever seen. However, despite knowing that they were being forced into coming here, the twins' curiosity had overtaken their desire to continue their previously planned travel routine. Like it or not, we should be there soon, Edelgard announced to her peers, without so much as a look at them. Upon hearing this, the twins looked at her, then faced the direction they were going in. Just like a pop-up book, the forest dissipated from their sight, leading to the view of a large mountain, alongside a large building atop it. When seeing this, Billet could not help but feel awe at the sight. Atop the already tall naturescape, was an even taller array of walls towering over the landscape, mixed in with various buildings in a town. Whilst the first layer of walls hosted the average village, there was a second smaller one within, guarding a large castle-like building in its confines. It had gotten to the point where the actual monastery was reaching up atop the clouds at its highest peak. That, my friends, Alois pointed with pride, is the very center of Fodlan. One of the many wonders of our time, might I add. I'm sure many people dream of going inside it, even more so to be taught at the Officers' Academy's tightest innards. So this is the center of Fodlan. Byleth showed little interest in the landscape, but rather the fact that they had never once before visited it before. It truly is, and you are going to be given the honor of viewing it, Alois once again answered. At this comment, Billet had a childish smile of joy appear from her face. It was one that could not be taken off of her easily. When Gerald noticed this, he returned the smile at first, but quickly remembered the reason he had made his children avoid it for so long. One way or another, he had to tell both twins about the circumstances that led him to leaving this place. The only issue, though, was when exactly he would tell them. Needless to say, he knew now was not the time, especially with the other 3 students around them. From when they gave their initial introductions to him, Gerald could tell they were of noble and important birth, even more so by the fact that they were the future heirs of their respective territories. Edelgard had previously announced she was the imperial princess of the Adrestian Empire, whilst Dimitri told of his role as the future prince for the kingdom of Firgus, as well as Claude being so for the Leicester Alliance. These were the 3 great countries in Fodlan's continent, and with these seemingly important people being present, Gerald knew it was not right to tell his children what he wished to say as of this moment, or else he would have started a civil outcry. Hey, you two, listen to me for a second. Both of Gerald's children turned to him. When you have time, come over. I need to talk to you and tell you more about what I know about this place. Will that be necessary? Alois had interjected. I can gladly show them the way around the grounds. Of course, lightening a friend's workload is something that only the best of them would do, he laughed to himself. Gerald felt a pang of annoyance hit him. With Alois around, he would not even be given the chance to give his own children a signal of warning. This was his mistake for not telling them these things beforehand. Whilst he was always an impatient man, he knew he had to wait for an opportunity, just this once. When the group entered the village through the first barrier, they had hastened their journey through the area to reach their end point. Whilst going through the town, Gerald suddenly realized that they were to meet her. Even after avoiding her troops for so long, he knew he could not make an enemy of the Knights of Syros. Today he had to give out against his wishes. This is such a coincidence, Gerald. Alois slapped the back of his old friend. I believe Lady Rhea was in a state of turmoil when she saw her best knight leave all those years ago. This will be a joyful reunion, I take it? Who knows? We may be able to work arm in arm like we used to. Now he remembered her fully. Gerald did not want to meet Rhea, the Archbishop of the Church of Syros. She was always a kind-hearted person, but something was never truly right about her. Before he could re-examine his thoughts, Billet interrupted him. Father, when we leave this place, can we stock up on treats? It's been a while, but I'll pay for them in full if need be. Even after so many years, you still have your sweet tooth. Byleth peered across the conversation. No, sugar should give us the energy to fight. Technically, this is actually a battle meeting, she winked at her brother with a sly grin. Leave the battle meetings to me, sister. I think you have a large element of personal gain mixed in when you lead them. This little exchange of words only made Gerald's face broaden. He had so many things to say, so why had he not said them sooner? For now, both siblings were indifferent to what was going on around them, but he knew this had to be changed. Trying to change his mind, he addressed the two before him. If we leave this place, I'll buy us some of the food that I know this place specializes in. Gerald patted the heads of his children, trying his best to ignore his own worries. We won't be returning to this place in a while anyway, so let's call this a celebration of sorts. The officers' academy within the inner gates of the monastery was nothing short of a marvel. In an instant, the twins caught sight of the large walls that reached up to the clouds. With this sight, they had known that this was a powerful monument, one that could withstand even the greatest of attacks. Edelgard, Dimitri, Claude, and Eloise had all left to take care of their own personal matters. They had told the main trio that they had to write up a report on their latest happenings. Unsurprisingly, Gerald was eager to wave his old colleague goodbye, along with the other 3 students. Their first sighting was one of importance. The second they had stepped into the gates, they noticed a balcony atop them, with a lone woman staring at them. At the sight of her meeting his eyes, Gerald felt a feeling of tension arise. The woman simply ignored him, but looked to the twins. After smiling in a pleasant manner, she left. Who was that? Byleth looked over his father. The Archbishop, Rhea. Put arms and be on your guard around her. Something about her rubs me the wrong way. Whatever do you mean? Byleth asked again, but Gerald did not answer this time with full honesty. I haven't exactly figured it out, but I trust you two will take my advice. Please, I ask this of you in complete faith, I want to know that you two will be careful around her. Realizing this was a great bother to Gerald, the twins looked at each other and nodded in sync. Do not worry, father. Your command will always be obeyed. This gave their father a sigh of relief. He had forgotten how royal his children were to him. Even if he had not formed a complete reasoning as to his orders, they obeyed him out of love and respect. Now that they had settled this issue once and for all, it was time for the main group to meet with Rhea within her chambers. Gerald was sure that she knew this as well. He could easily predict that right in this very moment, Rhea was making her way to her meeting spot to converse with the group. With his head held up high, he led his children to where he remembered her chambers to reside. They entered the room on the upper levels of the monastery. As Gerald was rushing his pace, the twins had little time to admire the surroundings of the monastery. It would only be after this conversation that they would be allowed to converse with the various students. The room was small. On the very opposite side of the one they had just entered, were an assortment of colored glasses providing sunlight for the area. The floor had floral patterns across it, as well as a path that led straight towards the small throne on the opposite end. On the far right of the room, was a second doorway to what one could assume was a separate office for any officials in the area to relax and unwind. The very first sight that was seen when they entered the room was of Rhea standing in front of the small throne. One could only describe her as the embodiment of all that was holy. She wore a delicate white dress, which contrasted with the green hair that hung below her face. Atop her dress was a dark blue collar that also held an array of gold-painted patterns on it. Finally, there was the headpiece that she wore atop her, which almost resembled the top of a sun shining on her face. Once Rhea had seen the twins, she smiled gently at them. I am so glad to see that fate has managed to bring us together. Dear child, I hope that we did not bring too much trouble in the incident concerning some of our students. She faced Byleth when saying this. It wasn't too much of a hassle for us, Gerald interjected quickly, so as not to have Byleth say anything that could lead them into a string of incidents. We're happy to have been of some help. Rhea took this chance to turn her gaze from Byleth and channel it towards his father. Yes, I know how capable you are, back from the days of you working for the Knights of Syros. Somehow, she had silenced Gerald with those words alone. Even he was not sure as to how it was made possible, but Rhea had a peculiar gift that she used to intentionally silence anyone who stood between her. In realizing that it was up to his children to take matters into their own hands, he hoped that they would carry on his will for him. We're pleased to make your acquaintance, Lady Rhea. Billette had offered a slight bow, however she was confused as to how to treat someone as supposedly important as her. There is no need to bow to me, young one. I'm simply happy that the goddess brought us together with only her hands of fate. Her smile was gentle, which only showed an even greater level of kindness in her eyes. I do hope that you can stay here for longer. In fact, I would greatly request something of you before you leave the monastery. Is there anything that we can be of service to? Byleth now spoke to her. As a matter of fact, there is. Before anything could further take place, a man had entered the room. He was one of middle-aged appearance, with stark green hair that resembled Rhea's. He wore a blue jacket, with yellow buttons to show a roll of formality. Once he entered the room, he looked at the group to address them, but turned to Rhea soon afterwards. "Lady Rhea, I believe you were asking me to remind you of how you wanted to speak with Geralt privately." His voice was one of a stern nature. "Ah, yes. Thank you, Seath." She turned back to the twins and offered another smile. "I plan to speak with you too soon afterwards. Please, can you wait here?" "Of course," the twins replied in unison. "I thank you most humbly." As she was leaving the room, she turned once more to them. "May the goddess protect your pure souls." Geralt followed after her. Noticing that they were now alone with the man, both of the siblings turned to face Seath. Once he too had stopped staring at Geralt's leave, Seath had turned to them. "Lady Rhea has imparted a great deal of trust in you. I do certainly hope that you can fill that void for us." "We will try to uphold any responsibilities you give us," Byleth answered, causing an indiscernible sound to escape Seath's mouth. Byleth quickly used this opportunity to speak with Seath regarding a question she had wondered since she stepped foot into the chamber. "What exactly does Rhea want to do with me and my brother?" Instantly, Seath was brought back to a foul mood. "I am not responsible for telling you, and if I am to be completely honest, then I should say that I am still yet to trust you as wholeheartedly as Rhea has." The tension had suddenly increased once he said this. Byleth, who instantly knew she had said the wrong thing, quickly looked towards her brother, as if to tell Byleth that he should take over for her. Byleth knew her signal, now deciding to speak. For now, this would be a conversation between only him and Seath. "Whilst I find your aggression most worrying, it will be our duty to make things right for you. I hope you can forgive us until then. As long as you listen attentively to what we have to say, I will see no issue. I do not plan to let you relax easily." In an instant, Seath had turned this conversation into a battle of sorts, but he had also noticed the signals the siblings were giving each other. "On a different note, I see you two adapt your style in conversation as you do for battle." Both siblings suddenly felt confusion in this. To Seath, he had noticed that to make up for the others' faults, the twins had switched over their roles. He imagined this was how they became such well-known mercenaries. Before he could apprehend the confusion of the siblings, another entity had made their way into the room. "Brother," it called out. It was clearly one of a feminine and young nature. "I hear there are some guests here. It would be most assuring for me to meet them." Once she walked in, everyone who was previously in deep conversation had instantly fixed their gaze at her. She was a small, stout girl, with frail arms and an almost pale face. She had an innocent smile on her, helping further add to the embodiment of purity that she owned. Her hair was green, just like both Rhea and Seath, which hung in little swirls around both sides of her head. "Yes, Flayn, they are conversing with me as we speak." Seath had instantly adapted his voice and spoke in a slightly softer voice to his sister. "Oh, that is most gratifying to hear." She instantly turned to the siblings. "Hello, there. It is very much a pleasure to be meeting you. My name is Flayn, and I am the sister of Seath. I hope my brother has not been troubling you too much. As the Archbishop's advisor, he has a tendency to be very cautious with new matters. He has given us no such thing." Byleth quickly covered up the worry of their previous interaction, so as to hopefully gain some trust from Flayn at the very least. "Pleasure to meet you." Byleth held her hand for Flayn to shake, to which she responded by doing so. "And you as well," she beamed. "I am hoping we can talk more in future." "I'll certainly try," Byleth said, happily. By inspecting her further, Byleth had realized just how short Flayn was. Her head had reached just around Byleth's chest, which made her look very young. However, she seemed to hold some maturity from her dialect. When looking at Flayn, it was hard for Byleth to believe that she was the sister of Seath. "Flayn, I do believe you should talk to them later. Rhea is yet to request from them as of this moment," Seath said, quickly attempting to rid the room of her. "My apologies, brother. I simply could not hold out for much longer, but I am happy that my longing to see these two has been satisfied." She bowed to the twins quickly in formality. "I hope to converse with you in detail soon." With that, Flayn had taken her leave and exited the room. Once she had left, somehow the previous tension had ceased. By some miracle, Flane had brought peace from where she once visited. At this, Billette breathed a sigh of relief. She seems like a good sister to you. Byleth had turned back to Seath. Yes, Flane and I have been through a lot. I do hope that you can be properly acquainted with her in future. This time, his hope seemed genuine. Before any further conversation could continue, the door had opened once more. The one who had entered this time was the Archbishop, Rhea. When she finally entered, Seath had made an effort to move out of the way so that Rhea could make her way to the front of the room. Once she had finally fully adjusted herself, she simply smiled openly to her guests and began speaking in a soft voice. Forgive me for my sudden leave. I have, however, managed to convince your father to work as a Knight of Ceros once more. I have but one request for the both of you, though. What is it that we can assist in? Byleth answered for the two of them. Previously, our teacher who was set to survey our students that were caught up in that attack, was to be the final piece we needed to get the school year running. Rhea's face showed small sadness as she said the next few words. However, he escaped once he saw the first sight of danger. It did not display behavior that was expected of our most humble academy, and for that, I cannot even begin to describe my disappointment. Her face saddened as she said this, but quickly changed once she faced Byleth. It would do me well for both of you to replace him, as a result. Both of the siblings were astonished by this request. As flattering as that may be, we lack the proper experience for teaching. With both of you leading, I am sure that you can manage. You seem like highly capable mercenaries, so would it not be resourceful to pass on your skills to the future of Fodlan? Does our father know of this? Geralt acknowledged my request and has fully permitted you to come teach here. Both of the siblings were now speechless. It would be wise of you to meet your new students. Does that sound sufficient enough for an easy request? You are aware that you are asking a great deal from me and sister. Dear children, I know all about the lengths of what I ask of you, but I'm sure the goddess will bless you eternally for taking this position. It was at this point that Byleth realized that he could argue no further. Once Rhea had said that their father accepted this offer, there was little chance of escape from this position. When Byleth turned his head to Seath next to him, he had instantly pieced together his skepticism for them when they had met him. Even Seath found this an unorthodox request from Rhea, making his suspicion and aggression aim towards both of the siblings as a result. Byleth could no longer carry this conversation further, so instead, he made his final say in the matter. My sister and I will attempt to teach this academy to the best of our abilities, then, he said, reluctantly. Billette, who had been watching her brother in complete trust, suddenly wore a face of slight confusion once he had said this. Nothing could be done however, as there was no turning down the offer that was just made. You may be excused for now. Please try to talk to all of the students once you are free to do so. Hopefully after, you can get a true feel for what you are doing. The siblings nodded silently at her order and left the chamber. Once they were out, there was an awkward silence that was present in their walk. Both of the siblings were now going to be teachers, but they did not yet know how Rhea had thought to entrust this position to them. If Geralt had wanted them to be wary of Rhea due to her incredible power in ordering her subjects, then both Byleth and Billette had foolishly fallen into her trap. Chapter 5, 3 Houses. By now, they had somehow both accepted the cold fact that they would not be able to escape this request. Both of the twins did not want to be teachers at the Officers' Academy, but they also knew that they were going to be forced into it. Needless to say, they were in a confused state after meeting Rhea. Thankfully, there was a good thing that came out of meeting with Rhea. As they no longer had any real duties to fulfill, both twins were free to explore what would normally be a private area of the monastery. Without Geralt, they could no longer ask for directions or clues as to their surroundings, but this sudden explosion of freedom being present to the two individuals gave them a variety of mixed feelings. That chat with Rhea was definitely interesting. Don't you think? Billette looked over her brother as they walked out of the room. Interesting, Byleth repeated the words of his sister. I certainly hope that there are more ways to exaggerate that word. Interesting, does not seem to be a suitable answer. You're right about that. It's strange. She seemed so nice, but she was also so scary. Also, did you notice she barely spoke to me? What gives? Whilst Byleth had too much pride to agree with her sister about this quality of Rhea, they both knew that her only addressing him was of a strange occurrence. Not once did she mention his sister, and it was hard to fathom. Of course, they would still be seeing much more of the Archbishop if they were going to be teaching the students here, so this fact was always subject to change. Before they could leave towards the grounds of the monastery, they were both suddenly stopped by two old individuals. With a simple tap in both their shoulders, the twins instantly turned their heads to them, but swayed their entire bodies after remembering their lessons from Geralt, stating how it was rude to only face a person with your head when they desired attention from you. Once they had fully adjusted their positioning, they were now allowed to take a full look at the new faces who desired their presence. Well well, it seems we have an extremely handsome guest in the academy. How cute that both of you are siblings. I hear you two are to teach the students here. I can only wonder how youthful instructors such as yourselves actually behave within the classroom environment, however. The people they saw greeting them were that of an old man and woman. The man was slim, and had a large height difference between him and the siblings. His skin was wrinkled, whilst his hair had gone grey with the long passing of time, which was also combed to lean towards his left side in a small ramp. He wore a grey woolen jacket, with a large brown scarf dangling down from his neck. His green tie had been carefully tucked within his jacket, showing a stance of maturity. The woman beside him was that of a different story. Whilst there was a clear sight of old age within her looks, her face had a range of face products which had done a fine job in letting her look younger than she actually would have been. Her clothes were that of a revealing nature, which consisted of a choker around her neck, holding a suggestive dark blue dressing that clothed her, leaving only the top of her chest and arms to be viewed without being covered. Additionally, she wore a high-quality jacket that was hung around her back, only finding true leverage from the contact of her arms and sleeves. Her hair was finely combed into curls, which helped show beauty and elegance within her looks. When looking at these two individuals, Byleth examined the way they spoke and the comfort of their familiarity with the place. This led him to conclude that these two people were the remaining teachers of the academy. It made more sense to think this, as their comments earlier would have fit. When looking at them both, it only added further questions as to why Rhea thought that the twins were suitable for teaching. After all, considering these new faces, the twins must have been far too young to be teaching at the academy by now. It is a pleasure to meet you both. Byleth held his hand to shake, to which the older man responded by doing so. I assume that you are the other teachers of this academy. But of course, the woman quickly spat out, before her colleague had any chance of speech. Hi. My name is Manuela. I'm a working physician, and world-renowned songstress, and finally, available. It's nice to meet you. It was at this point that she began looking at Byleth with curiosity, to which Byleth could only reply with a face of smug amusement. I am Hanneman, the man said, now in a sour tone. As you can tell, I'm a professor at the Officers' Academy, as well as a studying crest scholar. If one of you has time on your hands, then it would please me most if you could meet me to examine whether or not you bear a crest of your own blood. The contrast between the two instructors was already visible to the siblings. When they looked at them, they could see that both Hanneman and Manuela most likely did not get along, but there was also a bond between the two hidden somewhere. Years of teaching and committing to work with one another must have caused this. Hello there, Byleth finally had her chance to speak. My name's Byleth, and this is my brother, Byleth. She swung her arms to the direction of her brother, to which he nodded his head. My, the contrast between you two is most apparent. Hanneman had inspected them, just as Byleth had for him. Oh, thank you. My brother and I normally work in tandem. Ah, yes. If only I could imagine a world where two opposing individuals could work in harmony with each other. In an instant, Hanneman gave a glare towards Manuela. I do hope that you two can teach us all about it in the coming future. Byleth chuckled at the small interaction that happened between the two. Well, I'll try to get to know everyone once my brother and I are properly acquainted with all of the students. Ah, yes, the students. To this, Hanneman quickly jolted upright in realization. You ought to meet them now. I believe they are within their break currently. It would be wise to use that time to meet them, before it runs out, of course. To this, Manuela nodded her head. Well, go on. We'll have plenty of time to get acquainted with each other once you begin teaching. Her hands began ushering the two to leave the room. You're free to pick any of the 3 houses to choose from in this academy. Me and Hanneman may not get along, but we both agreed that you two need to have freedom in your first teaching year. After all, this must still be so new to you both. It is appreciated. Byleth bowed gently at their offer, but quickly tapped his sister's shoulder to alert her that they should move along. Once this was done, the 2 new characters in their lives waved goodbye to them and retreated to their own personal quarters. The twins could not help but stare at their exit in curiosity. It was a wonder as to how they did not get along well, in spite of how well they worked together. After ignoring this bizarre reality and turning back to the direction they intended to go towards, the 2 twins spoke as they descended down the stairs of the monastery. We seem to be meeting a variety of peculiar characters today. You can say that again, Billette agreed. Let's see, today we've met 3 students of the Officers' Academy, who all seem to differ to each other in a huge way, as well as a kind, but somehow scary archbishop, who father ordered us to stay alert around, and 2 siblings, who somehow make me scared one second, and calm in the next. As Billette reminisced, she turned to her brother for confirmation. Does that sum it up? A fine effort, I'd say, but now we need to meet the students. Byleth put his hands on his forehead, as if to avoid the oncoming headache. Do you think you can come up with descriptions for all of them? He joked lightly towards his sister. I could try, but I'm not really up for acting high and mighty around them. To be honest, when I saw how Claude acted around us, I thought it would be cool if I sorta did the same. I see no disadvantages towards that, Byleth nodded at her comment. As I am not quite up to speed with grasping emotions, you could help ease our class stress if the time were to ever arise, whilst I could handle the teaching. With this method in mind, you may be able to gain their trust, and I can help foster the students to be better in body and mind. So, you also make strategies for mundane things like teaching as well. Billette laughed. Regardless, I think I'm down to that. This whole teaching thing might work after all. No more exchange of words was now needed between the 2 mercenary siblings. After nodding their heads violently to each other in complete trust and agreement, they quickened their pace further down the stairs, with complete enthusiasm to meet the new students. Elsewhere in the Officers' Academy, were 3 individual doors leading to the separate classrooms that the school had. Each of the 3 classrooms had their own specially colored carpet, as well as their national symbol displayed beside their door. The very first class that the twins had decided to visit, was that of the Golden Deers, belonging to the Leicester Alliance of Fodlan. It was important to note that each of the 3 houses had represented students of a different country within Fodlan. When they entered, they noticed yellow carpeting had been plastered all around the room, as well as how the desks and tables were ordered in neat rows across the middle of the class. The national symbol for the class was hung atop the open doorway, showing the national symbol of the Leicester Alliance, and one of the Golden Deers themselves. Immediately, as soon as they were sighted to enter the room, Claude quickly made an effort to catch up to them. As he was the only one of the class that she could recognize, Billette gave a friendly smile and waved towards him. So, I suppose I should call you, Teach, now, eh? Whatever you like. I'm sure my brother and I won't mind, right? She looked towards Byleth, who simply nodded in agreement. Before Claude could add in more words, another student had walked towards the group. Oh please, Claude. I'm sure that our new professors wouldn't want to suffer your undignified schemes and mannerisms. As soon as they all cast their eyes on him, they knew that he was from nobility from the sheer force and arrogance he commanded with his words. The person that they saw who was disapproving of Claude's ways, was of a tall and slim nature. He wore the usual Officers' Academy uniform, except only a red rose had been tucked into the right side of his front, showing a form of elegance on him. His hair was a light shade of purple, and was neatly cut in a jewel-like shape to show his delicate manner. It was easy to tell he was from an upper status from his posture and wording. My apologies, Sir Lawrence, Claude mockingly joked with the man who interrupted. I do hope that a simpleton such as myself, can make it up to a brave and dashing noble such as you. Spare me your flattery, Lawrence spat, now looking over at Byleth. Will it just be you teaching us, or is it the female beside you? We will be working as one, Byleth replied with no hesitation. I'm more than a female, you know. Byleth muttered, unamused. 2 professors? That is most unusual. I believe it has its merits, Byleth replied. Does it now? Go on. I'd like to hear the mindset of our possible new teachers. It would bring me the most comfort, if our notably young professors actually showed us that they have what it takes to lead us. Byleth could not stand being beside him. She noticed that whilst her brother was taken aback by his carefree and ignorant attitude, they had both been getting along well so far in their conversation. Out of boredom, she tapped Byleth's shoulder and signaled to him that she would talk to the other students whilst Byleth was dealing with Lawrence. Noticing that she was leaving, Claude also made his stealthy retreat alongside her. Ah, it seems I'm meeting another fan of the famous, tactical retreat. Byleth smiled at his comment. Between you and me, we've been given permission to choose what class to teach, so we're just having a look around right now. Is that so? Claude quickly sighed in realization. Then I guess Lawrence talking to you wasn't exactly the safest choice if we wanted you to teach us. I'm sure there's more to him than one would guess. Byleth looked back at Lawrence's direction, to which she could still see him conversing with her brother. But judging by first impressions, I'd say you've convinced my brother, but not me. Well, I can assure you that we here at the Golden Deer House are the best of the best. We prefer to take a more wild approach to things. Wild, you say? Before Byleth could question any further, 2 of female students in the class had walked towards them, in hopes of getting an opportunity to talk to her. Ugh, Claude, why did Lawrence have to steal that teacher first? One of the girls spoke in a rather annoyed tone. I get that he's doing the introductions for us, but I actually wanted to make myself acquainted for once. Whoa, Hilda wants to do something herself for once. Claude showed a genuine shocked face at the girl. Is this a reawakening? Hey, I can do things by myself. Thank you very much. Hilda was a girl of a pretty face. She had fair white skin and 2 long pink pigtails on each side of her hair. Additionally, she also seemed to be wearing the summer uniform of the academy. Looking closely on her face, Byleth noticed she had put on an array of cosmetics in a solid attempt to beautify herself. Hello there. Byleth waved towards Hilda. I assume you wanted to meet us. Oh hey, Professor. Hilda waved enthusiastically. If Claude hadn't said my name for me, I would have introduced myself to you already. Oh well, what can you do? I suppose people just love helping out little old me. If you want, I can ask everyone to give you more opportunities to participate more if we ever teach you. Byleth had wanted to help, but at this offer, Hilda quickly began to stammer for a reply. Well, that's awfully nice of you. I wouldn't want to burden you though. Realizing that there were limited options to give a correct reasoning, Hilda quickly directed her attention to the classmate next to her. Speaking of participation, that reminds me, didn't you want to talk to the new professors as well, Leonie? Well, yeah, but it took a while for you all to notice me, the girl beside her replied. Now that their attention from Hilda had shifted focus to her friend, Byleth finally got a proper chance to look at Leonie. She was a girl of average height, with short orange hair and similarly colored eyes. Whilst she wore the traditional summer uniform like Hilda, she had an orange jacket wrapped around her skirt, which helped complement the look of her hair. Additionally, Byleth could not help but notice her singular black sleeve on the left side of her arms, which also fit with the black gloves on her hands. Wait, your name is Leonie? Byleth asked curiously. Yeah, have you heard of me from Captain Geralt, by any chance? Of course. Her face lit up, realizing just who Leonie was. My father used to teach you. I remember he told me a few stories about you as well. Oh, so you know that I'm Geralt's best apprentice. Leonie wore a cocky smirk on her face. Well, he never did tell us a lot about you, Byleth admitted, now seeing Leonie's smile suddenly fade. Frankly, I think he might have forgotten your name for a while. Once she realized her mood was quickly souring, Byleth tried her best to bring it back up. Oh no, I'm sure he didn't forget it for too long. Geralt still does remember you. I think. The mood was far too awkward for Byleth to continue conversing with her now. Quickly turning to the Golden Deer's leader, Belette quickly tried her hand at escaping the situation. Say, Claude, we need to do this quickly before we report to Lady Rhea. Would you mind showing me to the last few students of this class now? Sure thing, Teach. Claude began walking off to the desks, expecting Belette to follow after her. Oh, Hilda and Leonie, it was a pleasure to meet you. She smiled gently at them, before leaving to follow Claude. The two girls waved back at her. They could only marvel at Belette's simple manners. Even if they were going to have a chance of being her students, both of them felt that she acted nothing like a professor. To them, Belette seemed like a friendly face that they could talk to, which was a nice change of pace for them. The final 4 students of the class were busily chipping away at their different hobbies. Whilst one was reading up on a seemingly lengthy book, another was painting quietly to himself, whilst the third one of the students was busy eating a large piece of meat, which ended with the final one staring glumly at a sheet of paper. Belette first looked towards the student who was reading. She seemed to be of a young age, which was rather impressive considering how she was reading such a complicated piece of literature. In terms of looks, she had oddly pale skin, long and outward white hair, as well as light pinkish eyes on her face. Nothing was too unorthodox about her uniform, as it seemed to be that she had kept it under high maintenance. That's Lysithea. Claude had noticed in an instant of Belette's curiosity towards her. She's the smartest here, but also one of the younger ones. She's great and all, but reading bedtime stories every night is pretty tiresome for us. I do hope she doesn't rope you into it if you teach us. Do not treat me like I was born yesterday, Claude. She instantly shot an angry look at him. My apologies, Professor. Please note that anything that comes out of Claude's mouth is a simple fabrication of lies. I swear the only thing he can get right is my name. Oh, pleasure to meet you as well, Lysithea. Belette said, trying her best to ease the annoyed girl. I'll take that as a mental note. Thanks, though. Likewise. Please make sure to also note that I cannot stand the thought of wasting time. I'd appreciate it if you can make your appearance rather quick, or at least offer me some valuable insight into who you are as a person. That would be most desirable, if you are to be our new professor. Oh, now Belette was sent into a quick panic. Sorry. I honestly don't know much, and neither might I be making use of your time here, but if I'm honest, and forgive me for saying this, but you should enjoy all the time you have here instead of busily reading. It's always amazing to be as young as you are. Lysithea could only give Belette a long stare as she said this. When she began to peer into the eyes of her potential professor, Belette could finally see it. She could not completely tell, but it seemed that this suggestion had offended her in some way. Before any more of the conversation could continue, Lysithea quickly spoke again. I'll note your suggestion, but I'd appreciate it if I could meet you properly when class actually starts and you teach us. Sorry, Professor, Claude whispered in Belette's ear. She gets cranky without her milk. I hear the cafeteria has a hard time supplying enough for her. Before Belette could warn Claude not to tease Lysithea any longer, she had already slammed the ends of her book to close it, and a pink glowing circle with patterns within had begun to appear from her hands. She was formulating a new magical aura. Claude noticed this and immediately widened his eyes in regret. In mere seconds, the entire class turned their eyes towards Lysithea chasing her house leader outside of the classroom. Why can't Lysithea ever take a joke? A strong male voice came from behind Belette. She should really consider eating more meat if she wants to stop being teased so much. Lysithea should try to get muscles like me. When Belette turned around, she had noticed that this was the student who was eating earlier. He was a strong and well-built man, with slightly tanned skin and blonde hair. Whilst he wore only the vest of the school uniform, he had to use straps to hold his trousers in place, as his build was far too big to hold it in place. I see you have quite the muscles yourself. Belette could not help but stare at his big grin. Of course. I need to get big and strong if I want to protect my sis. The boy started flexing his muscles at this point. It's gotta be done if I want to help my family business, too. When the boy said this, Belette could not help but realize that the student who had been painting next to him had moved himself away from the boy slightly. Belette noticed this, but rather than confronting him outright, she had a different approach. And who might you be? She stared at the painting in hopes of bringing a smile to his face. I like your picture. Oh, now he finally responded. Thank you. That's my best friend, Ignatz, the meat eater had interrupted. Also, I think I said this, but my name's Raphael. Ignatz had only further inched away from Raphael when he had called him a best friend. Of course, as she had nothing to go off of to fix this issue, Billet was forced to ignore it. She remembered from when she was of a young age, how her father had told her to never meddle in another's affairs unless absolutely necessary. It was a difficult instruction to follow when he was not around, but just this once, she thought it best to leave them be. Well anyway, it's a pleasure to meet you both. Billet held both her left and right hand for the two to shake, to which they both shook at a different pace. If I end up teaching you, then I hope to be good friends with you all. You're already a friend in my books, Professor, Raphael said, whilst taking another large chomp from his piece of meat. But just between you and me, I totally think you should grow muscles. You would totally look more like a professor if you did. Whilst Billet would normally take offense by this sort of comment, she could not help but notice Raphael's face light up as he said this. Pleasure to meet you as well. Professor. Ignatz almost whispered. The final student that Billet noticed seemed to be of a more shy nature than Ignatz. Despite sitting next to her classmates, Billet noticed that she was making her best effort to stay away from them. Her head was cast down on a sheet of paper, however, unlike Lysathea, she did not seem to be as enthusiastic about reading it. It seemed that she was using her fake attention to the sheet as an excuse to not converse with those around her. Unlike the rest of the students that Billet had met so far, this girl seemed to be following the regulations for the uniform to her utmost. She had uncanny pale white skin, which accompanied her light blue hair, which was tied up in a little rope across her head, whilst also draping downwards to help cover her face. It was not that this student was failing to make an effort to talk to her peers, but rather the fact that she was trying to avoid them completely. I like your hairstyle. Billet decided to attempt to communicate with the girl. What's your name? The girl was caught by surprise. Rather than turning her head completely upwards to see Billet, she slowly raised her eyelids instead to look at her. Once she had seen the friendly smile on her face, the girl decided to speak as best as she could muster, to warn Billet of the dangers of being near her. I don't think you should be near me. She was only mumbling at this point. I wouldn't want to be a burden on you. Nonsense, at least tell me your name. Well. Marianne. There was an awkward pause of silence till the girl had realized that Billet was expecting her to talk a little more. My name is Marianne. She seemed like a unique individual. Billet wanted to help her. It seemed that Marianne had noticed her kindness, which led her to talk to Billet. However, it would take much more time if they were to ever be successful in procuring a lasting friendship. Before any further action could be taken, Claude had come bursting into the classroom with a childlike grin. Hey, guys, Lysathea got in trouble. To this, everyone had instantly turned to Claude. Whilst he was going to speak to add further detail on the matter, whenever he tried to bring out a word, he would end up breaking it apart between his laughs. By now, everyone in the class was growing increasingly tired of watching his behavior. I don't quite understand what's so funny, Claude. Laurent eyed him suspiciously. Lysathea is normally a student with outstanding behavior and etiquette. How could she get herself into trouble? By throwing a fireball at Professor Hanneman, that's how. He finally stopped his incessant laughing. She tried to launch it at me whilst we were running, but she accidentally landed it on the professor whilst he was walking by us. As we speak, she's getting her ears chewed out by him. Everyone in the class had instantly stood up and ran towards the outside. Well, don't just stand there, you need to show us. Hilda had started pulling on Claude's arm, and in an instant, the whole class was following after them with childlike curiosity. All that was left in the room was pure silence, as well as the twins. They could only stare in utter shock and amusement at what they had just witnessed. In such a quick amount of time, the entire Golden Deer class had somehow managed to empty itself. We've met Professor Hanneman, right? Billet asked, seeking confirmation. He's the one who didn't get along with Manuela. Him. There was a shock of realization as Billet pictured the image of Hanuman shouting at the helpless Lysithea. Oh my! I believe he must have been on his way to check on us. We have spent so long conversing with this class, that we have yet to check the Black Eagles and the Blue Lions. Byleth sighed. Before we move on, what were your thoughts on the potential of us picking this house? Billet had not yet thought of this question. She was having such a good time getting along with the students, that it had not hit her that she could choose to teach them. In knowing this, her face lit up with joy. I like them. They're all so fun and quirky. It'll make our days unique. Which is why I don't like it, Byleth sighed, leaving a gasp of shock to come out of his sister. They are too unorganized. Were we not given a choice of classroom so that we could make our lives easier for ourselves? But they seem obedient enough so far, Billet defended. We need to consider how sporadic their behavior may turn out. Do not forget that it would be difficult to try and converse with them if they are too focused on their own thing. Also, Byleth showed a face of disappointment when mentioning his final point. I do not think I can stand Claude's antics. He seems to enjoy acknowledging trouble and taking part in it. So, the Golden Deers are off, then. If that would be fine with you. I guess so. Billet began to exit the room as she was speaking. As you normally say, it's a team effort. We should try to find a class that we both would see a good future in. Your words are on point for once. I have my moments. With this, the two siblings left towards the direction of their new class. Whilst one of them had originally liked the prospect of teaching the Golden Deers, another had not enjoyed the maturity of the class as a whole. Thankfully, with 2 more classes left, there was a lot more ground to cover for them. The Blue Lions classroom was, thankfully, situated directly next to the Golden Deers. As with their previous class visit, the national symbol of Firgus was stuck on the front, whilst the carpet used a dark shade of blue. When the twins entered the room, the entire class stood up to greet them. It would seem that with the passing of time, the students had already heard of their arrival, and were getting more anxious to see their potential new professors. I see you want to take a look at our class. Dmitri was the first to greet them. If you teach us, then I hope that we make a good impression from this moment onwards. In an instant, one of the students had shot their head directly towards Billet. He was of tall stature and red, messy hair. His uniform was also open, showing laziness on his part. Noticing Billet, he instantly began to talk to her first. Hey there, he said, giving a sly wink. May I just say that you look absolutely divine. How's about we grab a bite to eat, yeah? Rather than getting a response directly, Billet had instantly turned towards her brother and spoke in a grim voice. Brother, I don't think I want to teach this class. Her expression was that of no emotion. In an instant once she had said this, the student who had attempted to flirt with Billet quickly widened his eyes. Oh, you're the new teachers, oops. After a moment of silence, he began to crank his head in the direction of Dmitri with a horrified face. So, what were you saying about good impressions again, Your Highness? In an instant, the entire class rallied to watch Dmitri and another student lecture the flirt. In a matter of seconds, this attempt at wooing Billet had instantly shifted the mood of the class to that of panic and annoyance. Hey, now, calm down, Ingrid. He was sheltering himself from the increasingly hard punches of the girl throwing insults and blows on him. I'm sorry. You say that all the time. How many girls will it take for you to realize that you shouldn't be doing stuff like this? It would seem that this was not the first time she had been irritated by his dubious antics. Weren't you listening when Dmitri said that there would be 2 teachers? I'm sorry, okay? I kinda assumed the boring-looking one was gonna be the teacher, and the hot one was their friend, or something. The immersion of the argument was ruined when Byleth had turned to his sister. Am I boring-looking? Billet could only attempt to try and feign ignorance at this query. As of now, the two were watching Ingrid and Dmitri send their barrage of complaints to the flirtatious student known as Sylvain. Don't mind them. This happens most days. Ingrid's normally a stickler for the rules. A bubbly voice had appeared beside the 2 siblings. Are you our new professor? You look way younger and prettier than the other 2. Oh, Annette, another voice had also appeared beside the bubbly one, this time sounding innocent and pure. It's both of them that will be teaching us. At least, I think they will. The students that were talking to them seemed to be quite close to one another. The one who seemed to be called Annette, seemed to be of a short height. Her hair was orange, and was tied in little circles and drapes. She seemed to be abiding by the rules, as the siblings noticed that she had not contorted her uniform, which most of the students here seemed to have loved doing. Thank you for the compliment. Billette was very tempted to pat Annette's head. My brother and I were given a choice to decide our classrooms, so we were just checking in and seeing our options. I'm sorry that Sylvain ruined it, Annette's friend spoke in disappointment. But I would be glad to bake some treats for you so we can chat some more, even if you end up choosing another class. Oh, you should try Mercedes cooking. Annette jumped up in joy. She's the best at baking treats. Despite having Sylvain ruin their first impressions, Billette had begun to get along quite well with these two students. Whilst she was conversing with them, all her brother could do was look around. There were only 3 students who were looking at him with patience. And who may you 3 be? Care to spar first? One of them replied, showing little regard for formalities. We can get the details over with later. I'd rather get to know you through skill first. Felix, His Highness has asked you not to demand that of our new professor, at least up until next week. Another student had quickly interrupted. Humph. I don't need to follow the orders of the boar. Just because you do it, Didu, doesn't mean that I want to. Amidst the fighting of the 2 individuals, the third and final one was nervously watching from a distance. Rather than taking his time to cease the infighting, Byleth decided to take this time to inspect them and define their characteristics. The one who Byleth had just learned to be known as Felix had nothing too unusual in his uniform. The only thing of note was his sword sheath beside his waist. His hair was dark blue, and was tied up across the end. There was not too much of note for his appearance, because it seemed that Felix strived in mainly displaying his attitude. As for Didu, Byleth could make out quite a few things of his nature. The way he had referred to Dimitri so formally, could have potentially hinted at him being a personal assistant towards him. His skin was of a darker color, and his white hair was combed onto the ends where they hung down below in a neat circular end. Compared to the other students, it would seem that Didu had a much larger presence than anyone in his class. This was not a choice of his however, as he had a much larger build than everyone. The final student who was anxiously watching his classmates bicker, did not tell Byleth very much. From his stout appearance and his choice to wear the jumper style of his uniform, Byleth could only gather that he must have been an individual who must not easily adapt to his surroundings. He had small freckles on his face, as well as short, messy gray hair. What are you looking at? Felix had finally fixed his attention towards Byleth when he had noticed him inspecting them. You're going to gain nothing by standing there. Are you sure you can handle my fighting style? Even if Byleth was not very good at conversational skills, he knew enough about people like Felix to understand what it was they wanted. Wait, Felix, didn't His Highness tell you to wait? The third student spoke for the first time. We shouldn't try to disobey him. I don't mind not listening to the boar any day, he snapped back towards his classmate. At least if I do that, then I can introduce myself properly. You still need to tell him who you are, Ash. Byleth had finally learned the name of the final student in the Blue Lions, which left him with nothing more to find out. There is no need for me to stay here and burden you with my presence any longer. In due time, I'll get to know you all. I'm going to take my leave now. This had startled all 3 of the students that were previously fighting with each other. They all quickly shot a confused glance towards Byleth, who paid no attention to them. Instead of saying his proper farewell, he simply walked up to his sister and tapped her on the shoulder. Once his sister had taken the signal that this was now their time to leave, Billette said her farewell to Annette and Mercedes, and they left. It took only a few minutes for the students of the Blue Lions to realize that they had left. Despite not saying it to one another, they were all amazed by the unintentional masking of their presence. Without so much as a word, somehow the twins had managed to take their leave in a quick and concise manner. All the students could tell at that moment, that if the siblings would become their teacher, then they would come to learn a lot from them both. As they had spent a long duration of time visiting the Golden Deer House, there was little time for the other two houses. Byleth thought that leaving early was a good choice for them, as they would have a sufficient amount of time to finally visit the Black Eagles. As per usual, the flag of the Adrestian Empire was situated on the top of the door. The carpet was red this time, which had contrasted well between the yellow and blue of the other houses. When the twins recognized Edelgard, she too had instantly done the same. This time when she came to them, they also noticed that an assistant of hers was also following along. "It's a pleasure to see you again." Edelgard smiled lightly when looking at the twins. "If you are interested in the Black Eagles, then I would be happy to fill you in on everyone that attends classes here." Before they could reply, the student beside Edelgard decided to speak. "If you have attracted Lady Edelgard's attention, then so too have you done the same for mine. Just do not bother wasting her time, or we'll see to it that it is freed up for her." The twins were not sure if this was a death threat or not, however they were not in the mindset to test it. The one acting as Edelgard's carrier was of a tall height. He had wavy black hair, which draped over the front of his face and covered one of his eyes. As he seemed to want to protect Edelgard, the twins noticed how he had a sword sheath on his waist. "We have already visited the other classrooms," Byleth began explaining. "Both my sister and I are to teach a single class this year, but we have also been given a choice as to which one we can teach. Would you care to show us around?" "Why, of course." Edelgard began to walk on ahead, expecting the twins to follow her ahead in the process. "Please note, one of our students often likes to spend her days in solitude. It is regrettable, but you will not be seeing her today." "That is fine. I'm sure one student will not account for the entire class." Whilst Byleth had paid no attention to this small mishap, his sister was much the opposite. It was a mystery to her as to why a student would choose to run away in their recess. The temptation to find out the reasoning was so great, that Byleth was almost eager to choose the Black Eagles for this reason alone. The first batch of students that they found were all too focused on their own discussions to pay any mind to them. It would seem that Edelgard had wanted to keep a natural environment for their new professors, leading to her not informing her classmates of the new guests that were to arrive. Still, this did not mean that everyone was oblivious to the fact. "You seem new here. Are you the new professors that everyone is talking about?" A voice had sounded from behind Byleth, leading to the group turning around. "Dorothea, how did you find out about them coming here?" Edelgard was sent into a panic. "I'm sure I didn't give you a notice. Edie, you're too easy to read. You've been in a good mood ever since you got back." This comment startled Edelgard at first, but she quickly recomposed herself. Byleth used this short conversation between Edelgard and Dorothea to attempt to find out more about her. Judging by her appearance alone, it was easy to tell that she was attempting to make herself look appealing. Dorothea had an unrivaled beauty within her. Her eyes were green, and she had long, brown, and curly hair, which flowed downwards at a medium distance, as well as a stylish black hat to help complement her uniform. Additionally, she had added a few small touches to herself, such as small earrings and golden bracelets on the both of her wrists. Rather than having a normal white vest behind her school uniform, she wore a black shirt. "Hello Dorothea, was it?" Byleth shook her hand, to which she responded by completing it and adding a wink. "Hello, Professor. If you end up teaching us in the future, then I wouldn't mind knowing if you're from nobility or not. A girl's gotta have some fun, you know." Byleth did not have much time to process what Dorothea had just said, as soon after, another student had walked in. This time, it was a male student. He had bright orange hair, which was neatly combed around his sides, as well as a handkerchief on the top of his uniform. From Byleth's perspective, he seemed to be of noble upbringing. "Dorothea, if you are looking for a noble like you say you are, then you should look no further." He began to offer her a hand to take. "I am Ferdinand von Aegir, and I shall happily tell you all about being from a noble upbringing." Once he said this, Dorothea's face switched to that of an annoyed expression. "I already told you once before. Make like a bee and buzz off, Ferdinand." Your words cut deeply. "I must say that I am yet to understand what it is that you do not like about me." "Well, I hope that you make it your noble duty to figure it out then." She smiled mockingly at her classmate. The siblings who had been watching this small argument realized that there must have been something more to Dorothea's reasoning for disliking Ferdinand. Rather than confronting this issue themselves, they thought it best to allow them to find time and talk about it. Thankfully, this small exchange of words had allowed them to find out the names and characteristics of their students. Now that they knew this, they could continue to move on to the next few that were remaining. Edelgard, I don't think that we have enough time to talk it out with all of you. Belette tried to speak softly, in hopes of not insulting her new potential student. Is it okay if you show us around the final few students here before we're forced to head out? Of course. I hope that we are making a good impression so far. So far so good. Their next destination to take a look at were the front tables of the class. The only people who sat on the chairs in the class were two students chatting to one another. From the looks of it, it seemed that one of them was busy ranting to his friend, whilst the other was trying his hardest to stay awake from his constant blathering. Linhard, did I not already lecture you about getting a sufficient amount of sleep already? I can bet anything that you weren't listening to what Casper said. Edelgard had flicked her finger at his head, causing him to jolt up in sudden panic. When the twins took time to look at the pair of friends, they could see that Linhard and Casper must have been close to each other. Linhard had dark green hair, however it had become scruffy over his sleep. There was not much that could be said for his uniforms, as he seemed to follow the requirements for the academy to perfection. Casper was the opposite to his friend. He had short and scruffy blue hair, which had somehow made a line across the middle. He did not choose to wear the traditional uniform for the academy, but rather the summer outfit. From looking at him, Byleth felt that Casper must have been a man of his own word. Oh, are you the new professors? You look strong. Casper was the first of the two to speak up in enthusiasm. I wouldn't mind if we could train sometime later. I may be short, but I can still fight. I would not mind it if I end up teaching you later, Byleth replied. To Belette, Linhard seemed like a peculiar individual. There was something strange about him that she could not shake off. Out of curiosity and friendly nature, she decided to attempt to speak to him. If you're so sleepy right now, then shouldn't you have slept earlier today? That is true, Linhard gave a yawn in between. But I normally spend my time conducting research at night. I suppose there is no true way for me to relax and study with all that I'm supposed to learn in this academy. I do hope that once you become our teacher at this academy, then you won't be bothering me like Edelgard does. What makes you think that I'll be teaching you? There isn't much to it, I suppose. Linhard gave a gentle smile towards her. But when you two are around, Edelgard becomes a much easier person to handle. Judging by your current nature, I gather you would want to help me by picking this class. This gave some amazement to Belette. How did you know that we were allowed to choose our class to teach? Simple. I believe you wouldn't go out of your way to talk to everybody, if it were not for a scenario given to you in which you would gain something out of that. It was purely hypothetical, but I believed you'd be going around to see if you should teach one of us. Me saying that you were given a choice was just me playing around and testing my earlier predictions, but it seems that I was correct. Yes, but I don't understand how you were so quick to pick up on that, though. Only pure shock could be found in Belette's reaction. Just from his speech alone, there seemed to be much potential oozing out of Linhard's character. When thinking back to this, it may have been the reason as to why Edelgard would annoy him to pay attention in class. With such great knowledge, it made sense to feel frustration from his wasted potential. Well, there are other students beside me to convince you to join this house. At this point, Linhard began to rest on his table again. Frankly, I'm too tired to entertain you. Since Casper's busy chatting with your brother, I think Petra would help you out. Is she a student in this house too? Yes. As a matter of fact, she's over there. Linhard pointed towards where the group had previously entered from. Across from them, they could see a girl attempting to talk to Ferdinand and Dorothea in an attempt to stop them from fighting. It would seem that Petra had made her way to them once the group were busy advancing towards Casper and Linhard. Rather than telling her brother that she was going to make conversation with her, Belette began to walk closer to Petra in curiosity. She was a girl of medium height. Her hair was colored in a dark purple shade, and was tied in little ropes around her head, which led to them hanging down from her left side. It would seem that she was of a different race from everyone in her class, as she had a slightly different color on her skin, as well as some foreign markings below her right eye. In terms of her uniform, she chose to wear the summer range of the Officers' Academy clothing. "Hello there, are you Petra by any chance?" Billet had made conversation towards her, which startled her at first, however she quickly maintained her composure. "You are asking if my name is Petra?" She took some time to examine Billet before adding to her question. "I have understanding that you are a visitor here." There was a strange twist in Petra's dialect of speaking. Whilst this had set Billet off at first, she had begun to find it charming. Despite it taking some time for her words to settle in, Billet was sure to respond to her. "My brother and I are going to be teaching at the academy. We thought that learning about our students might be a good idea." "So you are an outsider. I hope that the teaching she stuttered for a brief moment before speaking again. "I am hoping that the teaching goes well for you," she said, finally grasping the correct ways of speech. "Thanks. I hope that if I teach you, then I can know more about you." Billet smiled, as she always did. "If I may ask, where are you from?" "Oh, my homeland is in Brigid. I am finding that Fodlan seems to be full of kind and helpful people." She had a light, but innocent smile on her face, which quickly shifted to a look of sorrow. "Although, I am wanting also to go back to Brigid when I am next able to." When Billet examined her once more, she could tell that Petra must have missed her homeland. Even though she knew little of how Petra used to have lived her life, there was a glimmer of curiosity that was ignited from this. When thinking back to it, the students of the Black Eagles had made her more intrigued than anyone else in the other houses. As she began to think through her thoughts of which house to pick, she instantly made her final decision. "It was nice to meet you, Petra." Billet was impatient, but she wanted to talk with her brother once more. "When I teach you, then I'd like to hear all about Brigid, if that's all right." "I will find much happiness in telling you of my homeland," she said, smiling once more. With that, Billet began to run to her brother. Despite the fact that this was a classroom environment, she paid little mind to remembering this. Once she tapped the shoulder of her brother, she grabbed his arm and pulled him out of the classroom. Casper, who was in the middle of his conversation with Byleth, had little time to stop them. Once they were gone, the entire class looked to Edelgard for help on what had just transpired. "Don't look at me. I have no idea what happened either." Edelgard could only panic at the event which took place. The only one who could speak in the group was Petra. "I believe she said that she would be doing the teaching for us." In an instant, the entire class had erupted in shock. A large gasp was the only thing to be heard from them. It was a complete mystery as to how Billet had made her final decision, but it had all made sense as to why she dragged her brother out of the class. With a smile and cheerful gleam, Edelgard realized that she had won in persuading them to teach her house. "What was the need for you to drag me out of the class?" "I was in the middle of a conversation." Billet had stopped pushing and finally let go of her brother's arm. They did not go too far. After all, both siblings knew little of the academy, so Billet had only brought her brother to the nearest place of privacy. Within this area, were a range of doors leading to the individual student rooms. Billet was sure that since everyone was in their respective classroom, then that would mean that there would be no one to disturb them. "Brother, I want to teach them." "You made your decision without telling me." Byleth was busy wiping off the dust from his clothes to pay any attention at first. "Was it that important that you decided to drag me through the entire academy?" "Yes," she shouted enthusiastically, which startled Byleth. "I like the Black Eagles. They've got their own quirks and all seem like amazing people. I'm sure they're good at combat too. Wouldn't this be good for the both of us?" "I have yet to give it much thought. Then do it now, whilst the clock is ticking." "Brother, I want to teach this class, and I want to teach it with all I have. Please, can you agree with me?" Byleth could see desperation within her voice. This was not her first plea of help, but it was still one of her most emotionally induced ones. When looking at her face, Byleth realized that he had found one issue with the house. In response to noticing this, he simply sighed. The students. Byleth had only one complaint. We have not seen all of them. I'm sure we did. Do you wish to come out? Byleth turned around when saying this. Whilst she was confused at first, it took Byleth some time to fully realize what her brother had just said. Once she looked at the direction that he was facing, it had all made sense. One of the doors for the room was open, showing a small patch of messy purple hair peeking across them. As soon as they had noticed that the twins were looking at them, the person spying on them quickly slammed the door in panic, not before giving a girlish squeal for freedom. Instantly, Byleth realized who this might have been. Brother, she's that other student from the Black Eagles. Byleth quickly stood in front of Byleth to stop him from chasing after her. Edelgard told us that one of their students wasn't one for speaking. I think that's the one she was talking about. She must have overheard us speaking whilst she was hiding away. Is that not even more reason to avoid this house? Byleth was difficult to argue with. If we have a student that escapes with every opportunity that they are given, then it will only put us in a difficult position. You need to think through this carefully. We are not even experienced in teaching. She only peeked her head out of the door when she heard us talking about picking her house. I'm sure that even if that's the case, one student being difficult won't exactly hurt us. All the other houses had tons of different misfits. I am not saying whether she is a misfit. At this point, Byleth was at a level of getting annoyed with his sister. I am worried about her being someone who refuses to attend our classes. I attended all of my classes so far this year. In an instant, a voice was heard from the door, yet it was still unopened. We've only been here for a week so far, so I don't know if I would keep up that trend, but I'm not a misfit. Both of the siblings suddenly stopped their quarrel and looked over at the voice. She sounded scared. There must have been a reason for her to shut herself inside her room to such a large extent. From the view of her scruffy hair that the two had seen earlier, it would seem that she was quite unorganized in her mannerism. Aside from that, there was little to note about her, aside from how she might have trouble being sociable. Sorry if we insulted you. Byleth spoke through the door, with complete knowledge that she would startle her if she were to open it. Can I ask what your name is? A handful of seconds passed by before she spoke again. I don't exactly know you yet. Are you two going to be new professors here? Yes, we are. I'd like to know about my students. If it doesn't bother you, may I know your name? By now, there was suspense being added by her silence before speaking. Byleth knocked again to get her attention, but no reply seemed to come out of the other side of the door. Would it not be efficient to just open the door and talk to her? Byleth began to do as he had just said, but was quickly held down by Byleth. No, I'm sure she finds peace in being alone. What if it impacts those around her? Then we should try and find ways around it. Byleth had unexpectedly heightened her voice at this reply. Brother, don't you see? Any house that we pick has its downfalls. We shouldn't be looking at people like her as a burden, but a potential friend. We're meant to be teaching people like them. Is that such a way for a teacher to think of their students? By this query, Byleth had been defeated. Additionally, when finally realizing that Byleth had meant no harm to her, the girl finally opened her door. Finally, in full view, the pair got to see her. She was a small girl, with previously mentioned scruffy purple hair, and silver eyes. She chose to wear a jacket beneath her uniform, which helped her shield herself from the outside. When looking at her frail hands, Byleth noticed that she had squeezed them to each other in front of chest, as if to defend herself. I'm really sorry. I'm not the best at talking to people. She was beginning to slowly close the door again. My name is Bernadetta. I'm sorry for not telling you sooner. When finally hearing this, Byleth smiled at her. As she walked closer to examine her, she felt that Bernadetta must have been a smart and knowledgeable student who had chosen to hide it within her isolation. Ignoring this, Byleth could only see good things from her. That's a wonderful name. She slowly put her hand on Bernadetta's hair. I'm sure the person carrying the name must be even more wonderful. Don't you think? There was a brief moment of silence. Once she could no longer take being in front of them anymore, Bernadetta shut her door in a panic whilst giving a small cry. When it was shut for the final time, Byleth turned to her brother with a feeling of victory. You have something to say to me? I think you know what I'm gonna to say. Billet finally returned to her normal expression. They may seem like liabilities, but they can blossom with the right care. Brother, I beg of you. Please can we both pick the Black Eagles? At first, Byleth looked at the desperate expression of his sister, but then turned his head to the door of Bernadetta. She had made a good point. With only the heaviest of sighs, he signaled his defeat. You have made a good case. Let us go report to Lady Rhea. Only the happiest of cheers could be heard from Biletta's face. Once she had realized that victory approached her, it would be difficult to take away this feeling of triumph. With a slap on the back, and a jump in the air, Billet began to lead her brother to where Rhea resided. Check the description for the links to the author.